Awesome. All right. Hi, my name is Callie Wright, and I'm the director at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. I'm excited today to be joined by my friend and Vietnam veteran, Ron Worstell. Ron is going to talk to us about his experience serving in Vietnam and how that has affected his life since. So Ron, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're very welcome.
The first question that I wanted to ask you was just, were you drafted? Did you join? And where did you serve in Vietnam?
Yes, I was drafted. I had been attending college for 2 years and didn't know why, other than to avoid the draft. And I talked to my parents and I said, this is not for me and I'm wasting your money. I know I'm going to get drafted. Maybe I'll have a better head on my shoulders when I come back from the military. So sure enough, within 6 months, I was drafted and went through basic training and then was assigned to infantry training and had my 30-day leave and off to Vietnam, where I came in as a replacement in the 1st Infantry Division. And that was my first assignment, or my assignment, and joined the platoon and took off from there.
And Ron, we're here today specifically to talk about Agent Orange. Now, Agent Orange is something that wasn't really talked about too much until after the war was done in Vietnam, but it was prevalent within Vietnam itself. And Agent Orange is a herbicide. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about anything that you might remember about interacting with herbicides in Vietnam.
Yes, we saw it every day almost, and we didn't think anything of it. You know, it was something to kill the foliage. So it was a tool, it was an aid for us. Little did we know how much it might impact us later, but it was a good thing as far as we were concerned. I don't think I was ever sprayed on directly with it, but we certainly were in areas the next day after it had been sprayed, those kind of things. So yeah, it was thought of as a good tool.
And were there other ways other than the spraying? Were there other ways people might have been interacting with even the barrels or just the chemicals in general?
Well, yeah, there would be a lot of people that were involved with that. The helicopters were used to spray it, airplanes were used to spray it. They even had land vehicles that traveled around and sprayed it. So people handed those barrels all the time. And I think that's where Agent Orange came from. It was the color of the barrels. That's why they called it Agent Orange. They didn't know anything more about it than that. So yeah, a lot of people were involved in handling it. The thing that I found out is that once it was sprayed, and then the rains came through, and you had rains almost every day, that Agent Orange was then washed into the soil. And the soil then went into the rivers, and all of our water that we drank in Vietnam was pulled from the rivers. Now, the water was purified, so we thought it was good. And of course, it was safe for us to drink from that perspective from bacteria. But no one knew that the chemical Agent Orange would be in there. And that's why anyone who served in Vietnam between the dates of when they started using it, and I think it was in 63 or 64, and later, were exposed to it. Even the pilots that came in from, say, Thailand or something like that, hauling in supplies, they would land, offload their plane, go into the shack and fill out their paperwork, get a drink of water, get back on a plane and fly out. They were exposed.
When do you remember first hearing that there might have been a problem with Agent Orange?
I don't remember the exact date. I would have to think it was in the 1980s, 90s, where talk about the lawsuits and that sort of thing. And it was all pretty vague. And it was so early on, very few people were actually impacted by it. And there was a massive settlement that I believe it was like $180 million, which is nothing. And that money was all pretty much soaked up by the attorneys, those who were involved in the process. I don't know that any one individual got more than $5,000 from it, and very few of them.
When do you remember thinking that Agent Orange might be something that affects your life?
When my daughter was born, she was born in '74 with a birth defect called spina bifida. And at that point, I questioned if it was something due to my service connected in some way, not knowing whether it was Agent Orange or whatever. And we got involved with a spina bifida organization in Pittsburgh, a national organization. And it became apparent that Vietnam veterans who had children after serving in Vietnam, there was a higher incidence of them having children with spina bifida. So that's when I really first became involved. And then over the years later, I developed diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and that's also one of the results of Agent Orange.
What other ways has this affected your life?
Guilt, certainly for my daughter. And I think that's probably the most significant. I now am more cautious of ailments and things like that, that the ones that I know that are on the list for Agent Orange, should I develop anything like that, then right away it would send off a signal Agent Orange related.
Do you feel like you're still, obviously with type 2 diabetes, that is a lifelong condition, but do you feel like you're still within yourself dealing with the effects of Agent Orange in terms of how you interact with the VA or the healthcare system that you use?
Yeah, as far as the healthcare goes, VA healthcare, it's excellent. I'm really very pleased with all the care that I've gotten from the VA. The part about the VA that is so difficult is the compensation part. And it's just like jumping through hoops. Everyone I talk to says it's a struggle to get any kind of compensation. And it's almost like if they say no enough, you just go away. And I keep telling people, just don't go away. Just keep coming back with more information.
Ron, what you did a documentary a few years ago, and you'll have to remind me the title, but it's really fantastic. And in that documentary, you and some other folks go back to Vietnam, and it really focuses, the documentary itself really focuses a lot on Agent Orange and people's lives since. How did doing that documentary influence your perspective about your service and about Agent Orange?
Well, that was something I wanted to do. Early on, the Vietnam Veterans Fund had humanitarian projects in Quang Tri province in Vietnam. And every spring they would send a delegation over there to people with some deep pockets that could help contribute to that cause. And we talked to the people and said, I would like to go. As a veteran and as a volunteer, I have a need to go and see. I want to see how Agent Orange and spina bifida has affected the Vietnamese people. I told them that at that point, I no longer had a hate or any remorse or anything like that against the Vietnamese. They didn't do anything more than I did. Someone grabbed them by the back of the neck and said, you will go and do this. And my country said, through the draft, I did the same thing. So we were all in the same boat. The folks that I was unhappy about were those that made the decision to go to war in the first place. So because of my daughter, I really wanted to see, and that first trip was in '82. And it was very structured. The South Vietnamese government was still very protective. And you had person who went along with you to make sure you stayed onto the itinerary that you had proposed and didn't change anything. Well, I got to see the country and a lot of things, but I didn't get to see the children's hospitals and the care of the children and where spina bifida might be. But it was still a wonderful experience. But because of that trip, 3 other volunteers from the wall went with me. And one of them had this lady contact them that was wanting to do a documentary. And right away, he presented my name to this lady, Holly Million, and she contacted me. And she was doing a documentary about Agent Orange and how it impacted generations of people. Her stepfather died from one of the cancers. And she interviewed me and several other people. And I was like the second generation where my daughter was impacted by Agent Orange. And there was another fellow with us from, it was a Marine from Albany, New York, and his granddaughter was impacted by Agent Orange. So that was the story, the 3 of us. And then going back to Vietnam and seeing what it was like for these people living with it on a daily basis in Vietnam.
What would you say to someone of a family who's also experiencing this? You know, your daughter was born in 74, you said?
74, right.
74. So this is something that you guys have known for a really long time. Whereas if you're having those having grandchildren or even great grandchildren now, who are being affected by this, what's something that you would share with them?
That's a difficult thing because they typically would not know this information, the grandparents or the parents. Agent Orange is so low key, it's not talked about. I guess the veteran would start, if he had one of the illnesses associated with Agent Orange, then that would certainly be a trigger for looking for 2nd and 3rd generations. But that's 2nd and 3rd generation without the dad. I don't know how that would happen.
Okay. Knowing what you know now, Ron, kind of about Agent Orange and about its effects, how does that make you feel about your service? Does that change anything?
Well, I was very proud of my service. But I certainly believe our government did an injustice to us, all of our veterans who were there and served and were exposed to this. And the companies that developed it, Dow Chemical and Monsanto, they had a conspiracy going between them. They knew how dangerous this stuff was, but they pretty much kept it to themselves. And I guess when they went to make Agent Orange, the chemicals that they used were regular herbicides that like we would use on our lawns today. And when they make them, they're safe. But the need grew extensively for it, and they need to make more of it, and they need to make it faster. And they found out if they heated it up, they could do it faster. But that's when the problem started. That's when the dioxin appeared. It was the heating up of the chemicals that formed dioxin, and dioxin is the bad guy.
Ron, what is something that that I haven't asked you about Agent Orange that you think needs to be said?
Well, it seems to be that the secret of Agent Orange is out there, and we need to get that information out to the communities. And the best way to do that, I think, would be through the military service organizations, the VFW, the Legion, the reunion groups that all the different units have. Get the word to them so they can get it off to their children and their grandchildren. And even doctors are so removed from it, unless they're in the VA and have an exposure to it where they see it, they don't really understand it.
I want to talk about your service and maybe a little bit about your life before the war. Can you tell me, I know you said you were in college, but what was your life like before Vietnam? Did you have a girlfriend? Did you have a car? What were you doing?
Sure. I thought it was pretty much a typical life. Graduated in 1964 and went off to college for a couple of years and was drafted in 68. Had girlfriends, did not have a car. Because I was in college, I didn't have the money for a car. The priority was school. And I broke up with a girl before I got drafted. I didn't want to be in the Army and in the service and have that kind of a commitment. I didn't think was fair to her or me, so we broke up. So it was pretty much a normal life, I think. I had worked summers in a steel mill because I'm from the Pittsburgh area. And that's a good place for us to work. We had good salaries, good benefits. And they held that job for me while I went off to the service. So when I came back from the service, it was waiting for me.
When you got back from Vietnam, then you went back to work at the same steel mill?
I did go back. And at that point, the war was ending. So the demand for steel and manufacturing was down. And I would work a few months and I'd be laid off a few months, work a few months and be laid off. So I went to school for computer technologies and learned maintenance on computer systems, and got a job right away. And that was the end of my steel days, still working days.
Ron, when you were in Vietnam, what was your job there?
I was in a rifle platoon. We were air mobile, moved by helicopters a lot. And my role was carrying the radio. We had 2 radios in a platoon and 2 squads. So each squad had a radio. And when you join the platoon, for about the first 2 weeks, they give you a job to carry ammo for the machine gunner. And that was to allow you to get acclimated to the environment, see how the platoon works, all those kind of things. And then at the end of that 2 weeks, they give you a job. And the first job everybody wants to give up is carrying a radio. But we typically carried 80 pounds of gear on any daily basis. And the radio was an additional 22 and a half pounds. So everybody wanted to give up that radio. So they gave it to me and I liked it. I was a napshit. I wanted to know what the heck was going on. And several times they asked me to give it up to somebody else. And I said, no, I'm all right with it. I like it. And it was mounted on a rucksack. So it was easier for me to carry it and hang a lot of my other equipment on it. The only problem I had is if I got down, sitting down, I had to get help standing back up. But other than that, I enjoyed it. It was comfortable.
Ron, from what I've heard about radio, the person who carried the radio is it actually could be a pretty dangerous job. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it could be because you're typically in the center of the group, and usually there is some kind of command associated with that. So you have a lieutenant or a high-ranking sergeant with you. So those are vital targets. But where we were in the triple canopy in the jungle, I don't think it was such a big deal that we could hardly see more than 8 or 10 feet in front of us at any given time. So we didn't stand out unless we were out in a rice paddy or something like that. So I don't think it was that dangerous. And it could actually probably stop a bullet if it was coming from the back, that sort of thing. We did have one funny experience where we would get resupplied with water and food every 3 days. And they had these white 5-gallon jugs of water came in. And they wanted us to collapse them and put them on the back of the radio van and keep them until the next resupply, unless they got damaged in some way. Well, there was no way in hell that I was going to walk around with a white target in the middle of my back. So every one that I got managed to have a hole in it, and we couldn't use it. We had to destroy them.
Oh, that's good. Ron, is there any one thing that I haven't asked you about your service in Vietnam, specifically in country, that you think people should know about?
Yeah, there were some times that were very difficult and very stressful. And indeed, I have post-traumatic stress. That's been something I've been working with the VA for a lot of years, and finally I've been recognized for that. I guess the one incident that really is so fresh in my mind, like yesterday, is my other radio operator in my platoon. We were making contact with a large group of VC, and we were defending ourselves, and we were making rapid fire to the enemy, and we called in gunships, and they were there to help support us. It was getting dusk, and the gunship lost our position, and he strafed across us and fired upon our line. And the platoon radio operator, my partner, he was shot and killed in the neck. The lieutenant was next to him and missed. I was next to the lieutenant and I was missed. The sergeant was next to me and he was shot in the foot. So the two of us in the middle, for however reason, we were untouched. And why? Why was that to happen? And what was that all about for me? And I really had a hard time dealing with that.
Do you feel like you spoke before, Ron, about PTSD and getting help for that? And we've been talking at VVMF this year a lot about PTSD. Do you think that getting help for that, do you think the process of getting help for that and talking about that, do you think that's made an impact in your life?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I've been involved with the vet center groups and part of the VA for about 35 years now. And being able to talk to other vets that have PTSD and how they would control their anger that would come about from an incident of some kind. That was very helpful because I could tell them that this situation happened to me and this is what I did. So then they could relate to that. And when they came upon that situation, they could mimic me and follow what I did or come up with a good result for them.
Ron, I want to talk to you about when you came home. What was, there was a lot of strife and conflict when a lot of Vietnam veterans came home, and many were not welcomed home the way that they should have been. What was your experience coming back from Vietnam?
It was a time when it was not comfortable to be known as a veteran. People disrespected you. I never had anybody spit on me like so many people say they have, but that scenario was out there. I wanted to blend back into society as fast as I could. The only advantage to returning from Vietnam or from the military was that you could get a job. They knew you weren't going to get drafted. So it was easier to get a job once you came home. But other than, your family loved you and they were glad to have you back. They were pleased to be back and nothing happened to you. You didn't get hurt. But other than that, you just kept it low key that you were a veteran.
How do you feel, or rather, let's talk about the wall for a second. The wall was dedicated in 1982. Do you remember the first time that you went down to see the memorial?
Yeah, I do. It was with my wife and daughter. It was probably 86, maybe, in that time frame. And we were just on vacation, and we had stopped in DC to spend a couple of days seeing everything. And I remember walking past it, and I walked past it rather quickly. I didn't look at the names. I just walked past it, and I had that sense of hallowed ground in a very special place, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the names. And my daughter was only probably maybe 12 at that age. So they didn't recognize that why I was making such a fast trip through there or anything like that.
Do you remember the first time that you went and actually stopped and absorbed the names?
Yes. Like I said, I was part of a veterans group in Pittsburgh, the Vet Center. And every Veterans Day, we would make a trip to DC for the Veterans Day program at the wall. And we went as a group. We would have 25, 30 guys maybe. And I think my first trip was probably in 98. And that's when I looked up the names of my friends and made rubbings and actually got involved in it. And in 99, I really paid attention to these people with yellow hats on milling around and helping others. And I said, who are you and what do you do? And they told me that they were volunteers for the National Park Service, and they specifically worked at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And I said, well, how do you become one of those? And they told me how to go through the process of making an application for it, which I did. When I came home that Veterans Day weekend, I told my wife that our daughter Rachel would be finishing school in the spring. And once that happened, I was going to make application for the Park Service to become a volunteer. And I was going to take a little bit of that money that the VA sends me, and I was going to use that to make trips to DC. And I started April the 15th, 2000. The only reason I remember that is because of the income tax day. If it wasn't for that, I would never remember what day it was.
Ron, how do you think that being a yellow hat down at the wall has influenced your life?
It is the best thing that I have ever done for myself. It has done more for me than the 55-gallon barrels of pills that the VA has sent me over the last 40 years. I have a situation of survivor's guilt. As I explained about the situation with my friend, but also my ending in my trip in Vietnam, I had gotten sick. Because of the lack of water, I had gotten a kidney stone, a very large one that was in my kidney, and it wasn't going to be passed. It had to have surgery to remove it. And they didn't want to do it in Vietnam, so they sent me to an army hospital in Japan, where I spent 2.5 months recovering from that surgery. And then they gave me the choice to go back to Vietnam or to go home. The most difficult choice I ever made in my life. And I made the choice to go home, and it was only because of my parents. But I felt like it was dishonorable, you know, to my platoon, to my peers. Had I done my year, that was acceptable. Had I been wounded and gone home, that would have been acceptable. Had I been killed, that was acceptable. But to get sick wasn't acceptable. Now, nobody agrees with me for sure, but in my little pea brain mind, that's where my thoughts are. So it's a guilt thing, and it's just part of my life. Yeah.
Ron, we first got to know each other at a ceremony VVMF has every 5 years called Reading of the Names, where every single name is read on the wall, and it takes a period of a few days to get through. And we start at 4 a.m. and we go till real late. And I was wondering if you could talk about, you know, you've participated in a few of those now, more than I have, and if you could talk about that ceremony and that experience.
Yeah, that is a great experience, and I've been doing it ever since I became a volunteer. I think it's like 4 of them I've done now, and just to be able to go up there and honor your buddy that was killed in Vietnam and be able to read his name, it's just a fulfilling event. And I tell people that come there to do that you know, that this is one of the greatest things that you can do. And they have a specific name that they want to read, maybe, and it may have already been read, but we tell them, here, sign up to do the next one, and you'll read 30 names. And at the end of your 30 name, you can add the name of your loved one or your friend. And it is very moving. It really is. And more people need to become aware of that and advertise that. I know we advertise it pretty well, and we get a lot of people signing up way ahead of time, but we're coming up on it next year. So we'll be doing that again.
Ron, what do you think your generation, how do you think the Vietnam War affected your generation?
Well, several different ways. For one, we're never going to have another veteran come home like we came home. We're going to make sure that they're welcomed home and they're appreciated for what they do. The other thing that I can think of that I don't know whether it'll ever happen, but hopefully we can influence our governments that if we're going to go to war, we need to have an exit plan before we ever start. No reason for it to drag on 15 to 20 years. We should have a goal, you should accomplish that goal and get out.
And Ron, what haven't I asked you about being a veteran that you think people should know?
I think most veterans are wild, crazy guys. And, you know, there was some reputation for that, what we called the postal workers, you know, going postal, that kind of stuff back in the 70s and 80s. But truly, they're good people. And for employers, probably some of the best people you can hire for a job because they are structured. They know discipline, they know goals, and they're already got that mindset, and you don't have to train them along those goals and those assets.
Ron, one thing that I think is interesting and important for people to know is that you were involved in a documentary specifically related to Agent Orange and Vietnam. Could you share with us a little bit about that?
Yes, back in 2008, I was invited to go back to Vietnam with a group that was doing a documentary on Agent Orange. And it was taking on the subject matter of the 3 generations of folks who have been impacted by Agent Orange, all starting with veterans. The name of the documentary was A Permanent Mark, and it was produced and directed by Holly Million. Holly's stepfather passed away from one of the Agent Orange cancers. I was asked to join because second generation, I have a daughter that was born in 1974 with a birth defect called spina bifida. And the third gentleman was invited, and he was a Marine in Vietnam, and he has a granddaughter who has kidney problems related to Agent Orange. So we went back to Vietnam, and this is what I'd hoped to see in the 2004 trip I made with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. But the government there is pretty selective of what you can do and what you can't do. And you have to have an itinerary and stick to it very tightly. So when we went in 2004, we weren't allowed to see places that we would have wanted to go to show this documentary, to show more about the spina bifida and other ailments. But it was a good trip, and we learned a lot about Vietnam. So when this trip came up to me as an opportunity in 2008, I jumped on that. And I just wanted to see if spina bifida was as prevalent in Vietnam as it is here in the US.
And what did you find out, Ron, on your trip to Vietnam?
We got to see a couple different locations. Some were orphanages where abandoned children are left would have disabilities. And certainly the situation with spina bifida was prevalent there. We also went to a place in what we call today is North Vietnam. And it was a very nice facility that cared for children with disabilities. And one of the rooms we went into, and children were learning word processing. And we found out after we left the room that they were all about to graduate. They were deaf and dumb. And we didn't know that at the time, but they were learning a quality skill set that they could leave there and provide for themselves and their families very well. We also went into an area where there were children with more severe disabilities. And we saw children that obviously had neural tube defects or something like that, causing their problems with their ability to walk and that sort of thing. So it was kind of enlightening.
Ron, is that the last time that you went to Vietnam?
That is, yes. I've been asked by people if I would ever go again. And I say, no, not necessarily. I don't think so. I've accomplished everything I wanted to in my 3 trips. And if there was a real reason for me to go where someone was suffering with PTSD or something like that, or spina bifida children, and they needed someone to go as a mentor and help them get through this, and making the trip would make it worthwhile for them, I would probably go again.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron.